I thought I'd begin tonight by telling you my story. I did not set out to change the world or South Africa's nutrition. Absolutely had no interest in doing that. All I wanted to do was answer my own problems. And my own problem was that in 1977, I adopted the new diet guidelines, which were that one should eat lots of carbohydrate and cut fat out the diet. And I was at the forefront with my good friend, Professor Lionel Opie, who I debated a few months ago. He was the man who put me on the diet because I was working in his laboratory and he knew everything, and the cardiologists around the world had said that high fat is causing heart disease and we must cut fat from the diet and become healthy. So I did that for 33 years. I didn't eat fat. I just ate carbohydrates. And I got fatter and my running got worse and I was falling asleep at the inappropriate times and my energy was going down. And eventually I discovered subsequently that I had type 2 diabetes. Now think about that. Here's a guy who does not smoke. He does not drink. He runs 70 marathons. He follows the dietary guidelines of the day and he develops type 2 diabetes. But I thought I was doing it all right. What went wrong? My father died from type 2 diabetes. So we have awful genes in my family and I've passed them right through to my children and I have evidence for that. So that made me begin to wonder that maybe this diabetes problem is genetics and a high carbohydrate diet sustained for a long time. And you can do all the running you like and all the exercise you like, but if the genes are bad and you eat too much carbohydrate, you get into trouble. So I had an epiphanous moment, and Andre said I wrote this book, Waterlogged, and in which I attack the sports drink industry in the United States of America because they manipulated science globally. And I learned how they did it, and it's a really good message that they manipulated the scientists. They bought them out, they paid them to go all over the country, provided they said a couple of things. And the one thing was that they said you must drink a carbohydrate drink if you're going to run marathons, and you must drink as much as is tolerable. Those were the two rules, and if you said that, you'd be funded and you'd become famous for that. And then they got the guidelines from the American College of Sports Medicine to incorporate exactly that. That to be healthy during marathon races, you had to drink as much as tolerable. We had already proved by 1991 that if you give that advice to people, you will kill women. You will kill women who run 6 hours in a marathon and who are told to drink a lot. And we had predicted that on the basis of evidence collected in South Africa, but there was one case that started it all in 1981. And people often say, anecdotes don't tell you anything, they tell you a lot. In 1981, I reported the first case of a woman over-drinking during the race and her blood sodium dropped. And she wrote to me, she was from Johannesburg, and she said, what happened? I said, I have absolutely no idea. 5 years later, we were able to prove that people who get this problem of low sodiums have overdrunk, and we proved it beyond contention. So we already knew by the 1990s that this advice was going to kill people. So I wrote the book in anger, and the title originally was The Search for the Killers of Cynthia Lucero, because Cynthia Lucero was a lady who died in the Boston Marathon doing the advice. She was given the advice, you must drink 1.2 liters per hour. And if you run a 6-hour marathon in air temperatures of 10 degrees centigrade, which is the race she ran in Boston, you're going to overdrink and you're going to be in trouble. And she died as a consequence. And we predicted it 20 years before that was going to happen. So I was very angry, so I sent the book off that night. And it was December the 12th, 2010. And in the middle of the night, my brain said to me, Tim, you must get up tomorrow morning and you must run, and you must never stop running for the rest of your life. So of course, obviously I had been running, but I hadn't run as much as I had been in the past. So I got up at 5 to 6, woke up, jumped out, went out for my run, had the worst run I've ever had in my life. So, and there's a little hill near my house. It's a tiny little hill, and I reached the top, and I thought it was the summit of Mount Everest. I felt so terrible. And then I realized, no, something's got to give. So I came home, and life is small things in life. And I opened my emails, and there it said, it was an advert for a book, it said, lose 6 kilograms in 6 weeks without hunger. And I said, well, that's garbage, because I know if you're going to lose weight, you've got to be hungry. It's the only way. You've got to be disciplined and exercise, etc. So I'm about to delete it. And then I notice the three names, Volek, Finney, and Westman. And I say, hold on, we did research in the 1980s based on their ideas that maybe a high-fat diet is healthy and for athletic performance. We were the second people in the world to study high-fat diets in athletes, and it went back to the 1980s. So I said, why would Volek, Finney, and Westman write such a stupid book claiming that you could lose 6 kilograms in 6 weeks without hunger? And then it got worse because the title said, The New Atkins for a New You. But Atkins was the guy who killed all of us by making us eat fat. I said, no. I've got to find out. Because when you get something like that, that's completely paradoxical, you better go and investigate it. So I drove right down to Exclusive Books in our town, and there was the last copy of this book. And I took it home and I opened it. And within 2 hours, I decided, what happened to my education? What happened? How is it possible that all this information on this low carbohydrate diet was completely foreign and unknown to me? I'm a biologist who's meant to know the field. How could I not have known that? And it said 150 studies studying the effects of low carbohydrate diets. And I read enough, and there they were. These papers were published in some of the top journals in the world. So I said, that's it. If eating this so-called healthy diet has produced type 2 diabetes, why don't I do the exact opposite? And so I said, from that moment, that's it, no more carbohydrates. And I started that day. And the next part of the story is that 8 weeks later, I had to go to Sweden to speak to all the elite athletes, particularly endurance athletes. And so I'd really started, I thought, imagine if I'm 6 kilograms lighter when I go to Sweden and talk to these athletes. We're all narcissistic, of course. So I said, that'd be fantastic. So anyway, 8 weeks later, I go to Sweden, and without 1 second of effort, I've lost 11 kilograms. 11 kilograms in 8 weeks without effort and without one trace of hunger. One moment of hunger. And I thought, geez, this is something. And so I continued, and I didn't say anything to anyone, but they could see I was shrinking. So people said, what happened? So I said, actually, I found this book and I started eating. I just cut the carbs a little bit and so on. But eventually it came out. A couple of people interviewed me and so on, and then it came out. And I knew that then there'd be trouble, because here's Noakes saying you must cut carbs and eat fat, and gosh, I knew there would be a crisis. But all the time I was reading, and I've now read at least 100 books on nutrition as it relates to the low carbohydrate diet. And it has shown me that there is a body of very strong evidence out there showing that low carbohydrate diets are highly beneficial for a proportion of the population. And I'll go into that a bit later. So anyway, so that's my trajectory. And the more I'm getting involved, the more people are getting angry and angrier and writing these very nasty comments about me and so on. And incidentally, the strength came from my wife. So people always ask, how do you take all this criticism? And the answer is, she just said, listen, you are not the victim. Don't play victim, that's all. And when my own Dean of Medicine wrote an article in the Cape Times criticizing me and being very, very harsh in words that perhaps he shouldn't have said, then she said, that is it. I am totally committed to your support, utterly committed. And that was a few months ago. So you have to, if she had wavered, I would have stopped. But she never wavered. So anyway, we come to July last year, and the 3 other co-authors of The Real Meal Revolution come to me and say, listen, let's put this book together, and would you write the foreword? And I said, well, okay, I'll go away and think about it. So I started writing, and by the end I'd written a whole 25,000 words about stuff that was in my head, which I wanted to write down, and which expressed my position on the low carbohydrate diet, or perhaps even more, the absence of evidence that the low fat diet that we've been eating for so long is healthy. And so in 6 weeks, we put the book together. And normally it takes me 10 years to write a book. This one took 6 weeks, because I guess all the evidence was in my head, and the guys put together the recipes and photographed them. And the reason why the book has been so successful is because the recipes are delicious. You know, if you pick up this book and it says this is how you lose weight, I mean, anyone would be stupid not to try it. Because, so that my co-authors were brilliant on that. Within the first month, within the first 2 weeks, we'd sold 10,000. And the company is so small, they could only afford to print 10,000 at a time. And when the 10,000 had gone, they said, but we haven't got any money for the next 10,000. So it was a real issue. And eventually they raised the money, and so we've carried on. And in fact, it's up to about 160,000. I think if you open the book at the back tonight, you'll see it's the 15th printing. So it has really taken South Africa by storm. And in fact, it's going to be released in the rest of the world in February next year. And at the moment, it looks like between 15 and 20 countries will be releasing it. So we're hoping to change the world as well. So what have I learned from this whole process? The first thing I've learned that nutrition is largely a religion. And that's why people get so unhappy, because it's politics and religion. Sorry, politics and nutrition. Those are two things that are deeply ingrained in us. And once you start discussing religion or nutrition, you're really going to the core of the person. And we defend that terribly. And so, obviously, we offended a lot of people. And the people who really got most offended were the vegans and the vegetarians. And they're a very powerful and strong grouping. Although they're small, they're very, very opinionated. And then there's a group who eat raw food, and they also don't think this is great. And then the balanced diet group, who say that the diet must be balanced. But the reality is there's no mammal on this earth that eats a balanced diet. And it's a point that one needs to make, that the question I ask, this is the fundamental question in nutrition. If you can't answer this question, you're not going to pass nutrition in my book, is why don't all mammals eat the same foods? That's the question. Why don't all mammals eat the same food? Why doesn't a lion eat the same as a giraffe? I mean, they've got hearts and lungs and so on. A giraffe eats acacia plants. That is all. If you take a giraffe, Mr. Giraffe, I think you need a balanced diet. I think we should add some hay and some lucerne to your diet. It will die. It will die very quickly. Why? Because it has a bacterial flora in the gut that is designed to take the acacia plant, which contains relatively little nutrients, and turn it to all the nutrients that that animal needs. We know that chimpanzees, the gut converts 50% of the fat in there that they need is from carbohydrates converted to fat in the gut. And we don't even know what the bacteria in our gut are doing at all. Now, take this a bit further. The most insulin-resistant or carbohydrate-intolerant mammal on this earth is a lion. If you feed a lion carbohydrates, it will become fat and develop diabetes, just as all your cats do. All your cats develop diabetes. Why? Because they are carnivores, and you're feeding them this science-based diet. And you have to ask, why are you given a science-based diet for a cat which is a carnivore, which contains carbohydrate? And go and find out why. And find out what influence there is of industry on the veterinarians in this country to sell you a product that is not designed for your cats. And then the consequences are your cat dies young because it develops diabetes. Cats are designed to eat 1 mouse every second day. That's what they're designed to eat. And you will cure your cat of diabetes tomorrow if you feed it 1 mouse every 2 days. That's what it needs. So I hope I'm getting the point across that we're all designed to eat foods with which we co-evolved. That's the key. So to understand your nutrition, you have to find out what foods did humans co-evolve with. And if you feed humans those foods, they will be perfectly healthy. The other example is if you go to a zoo and you find the animals are sick, it is because they are fed not the foods that they are eating in Africa. For example, all the elephants in North America are obese. Why? And how did they find out? Someone traveled around Africa and he took pictures of the backsides of elephants. And he graded them and he said, these are size 3. So if you're in the Kruger National Park, you have to have a backside size 3, you're perfect. He then went to America and they were all 5s. You see, all the backsides were 5s. Hamburgers. And they're all infertile and they're sick and they can't reproduce. And the zoo elephants are going to pass away because they can't reproduce. And why? Because they're living in a zoo and eating zoo food. And ladies and gentlemen, you are all living in a zoo and you're all eating zoo food. And that is why you are sick. Yeah, that is why you are sick. And I'm going to go and suggest to you that nutrition is the single most important discipline in medicine, in the health sciences. Nutrition is. And we don't focus enough on nutrition research. Not at all. So, it's crucially important. I would argue, and I'm going to talk about it a bit in a few seconds, 85% of the diseases that we call chronic disease of lifestyle are not even diseases. They're not even diseases. They're an abnormal biological response to an abnormal input. Just like the elephant, if you give it the wrong foods, develops obesity and becomes infertile. But the elephant's not the problem, it's the food the animal's eating. And I'm going to show you that there's one underlying condition for most of the chronic ill health that we see in this country. And if you don't understand the underlying problem and the cause, you can't help patients. So, we'll come to that in a second. So in my opinion, it's the processed foods that we're eating that are the problem. And the key to the processed foods that are the problem is sugar, flour, wheat, and vegetable oils. You may not eat them, please, please. And I know, look at your table, it's full of them. It's full of sugar, it's full of flour or wheat, and it's full of vegetable oils. And those are not what humans co-evolved with. Vegetable oils are started being produced in 1911 by Procter & Gamble in the United States. Before that, we had no vegetable oils. We ate lard and butter. And the vegetable oils were introduced, and we started to get sick after that. And so part of the key to your diet is not what you eat, it's what you don't eat. And if you want to be healthy, don't eat those three things. Now, why has the real meal revolution been so successful? Because it is biologically based. And the key issue is hunger. If you want to be lean, you may not be hungry. You may not have addictive eating behaviors. And the key problem in our nutrition is that we have raised people that have abnormal addictive eating behaviors. For example, you get up in the morning and you eat these cereals and grains which are full of sugar. And all they do is they make you hungry. And 3 hours later, what do you look for your hunger? You look for something that is high carbohydrate with lots of sugar. And you eat again, and you eat again, and you eat again. And that is an addictive eating pattern which has nothing to do with normal biology. It is purely driven by the processed food industry who have caught you and addicted you to sugar. And sugar is the most addictive chemical that we know of. It is more addictive than cocaine and heroin. Yet we provide it freely to our children. Beginning 6 weeks or 6 months after their birth, they put on cereals that contain masses of sugar. And that's how we addict ourselves. If you are eating properly, you should not be hungry, in my opinion, and this will be contentious because this is the way I eat. I eat a big breakfast, I do not eat till dinner. That's it. Nothing else. There's no need to eat during the day. Because that's the biology of humans. We were designed to eat a lot of food infrequently. And every time you eat, you spike your glucose and you spike your insulin, and I'll show you that that's what's causing the problem. So, a diet will only help you if it controls your hunger. If it doesn't control your hunger, it's a waste of time. It's not going to help you control your body mass. So that brings us to the real core of the talk. And that is that the underlying problem that I have is a condition called insulin resistance. That is the key. And insulin resistance is a condition that was started in the 1960s by a chap called Jerry Raven at Stanford University. He reads the textbooks of diabetes, which was written in 1910 by a guy called Himsworth. And Himsworth describes there are two types of diabetes. There is one insulin deficiency diabetes, and that is in people who get it early in their lives. and there is insulin resistance diabetes. And he says, okay, what does insulin resistance mean? And he spends the next 50 years studying insulin resistance. Now the question is, I'm going to describe what insulin resistance is, but I'm going to tell you how prevalent is it. Well, in the United States of America today, we know that 50% of the population have either diabetes or pre-diabetes, i.e. they're insulin resistant. So we know that 50% of the United States population is insulin resistant. And the other 50% hasn't been tested yet, but will become diabetic in due course. It's predicted that in this lifetime, between 30 and 50% of all Americans will become diabetic. So that shows that insulin resistance is the most common condition in the world. There are 400 million of us diabetics. 400 million. You thought HIV was prevalent. Diabetes is the disease. And the tragedy about diabetes is it's the worst disease you can have if you don't control it, because it affects every part of your body and it destroys you as a human being. And I saw it in my father, and that's in a sense why I'm motivated to do something about it. So, what happens in insulin resistance is that you are unable to metabolize carbohydrate normally. And so instead of storing carbohydrate in your liver or in your muscles, you have to turn it to fat, and particularly in the liver. And so you get a fatty liver, and so your tummy starts to protrude, and that would be the first sign that you're insulin resistant. And the carbohydrate that you've eaten, you turn to fat in the liver and also in your fat cells. The liver is so disturbed that it can't do certain things. It cannot produce HDL cholesterol. Now, all of you know HDL cholesterol is quite important. So your HDL cholesterol goes down, and many people think a low HDL is a critical factor. There's a paper published this week showing that the best predictor of your risk of heart attack after the age of 80, kind of getting the age I'm interested in, is a low HDL cholesterol. Not the other one, not the bad cholesterol, the low HDL. The next thing that happens is your blood triglycerides go up, and many people say high triglycerides are very unhealthy for you. And the third thing that happens is you start to produce the bad cholesterol, but you produce small, dense LDL cholesterol particles, which are considered to be the most noxious. So we can tell if you're insulin resistant by simply measuring your HDL cholesterol, your triglycerides, and your small, dense LDL cholesterol particles. And none of you ever, almost never, have those measured. We measure your cholesterol, which is essentially meaningless value, because those are the variables that you want to measure. And then we can measure more other things. So what happens with insulin resistance is you get worse and worse and worse, and you get fatter and fatter and fatter. And why do you get fat? You get fat because you're converting that carbohydrate, which is highly dangerous to you, into fat, which is less dangerous. And we got it all wrong. We said obesity is caused by the fat cells making you insulin resistant. It's not that at all. You're born insulin resistant with varying degrees of insulin resistance. You eat a high carbohydrate diet, you become fat, and then you get all these complications. And my argument is that if we looked after insulin resistant people better, and we made sure that they cut their carbohydrate intake, we would not have any diabetes at all. At all. We could eliminate diabetes and not have it as the most prevalent disease in the world. And so you have to ask, but why has it happened? Why don't people see it? And I'll tell you why. So Jerry Raven deserves the Nobel Prize for defining insulin resistant. And incidentally, what he also showed is that it's insulin in the high insulin levels which cause all the damage to your body. It causes you to gain fat. It causes your arteries to become damaged. It causes your blood pressure to rise. It causes your blood uric acids to rise. It raises your blood pressure. They are all insulin effects. And we're not told that. Now, where did he get it wrong? Where did he miss out? Because he was too scared to say we've got to cut the carbohydrates. He said, yes, you must limit the carbohydrates. But he didn't understand that if you're profoundly insulin resistant like myself, you cannot tolerate more than 25 grams of carbohydrate a day. That's it. Or else you become sick. And why couldn't he say it? Because he would have had the same response that I've had. Dr. Raven, are you telling us we must eat more fat in our diets? You're going to kill us from heart disease. And that's where he went wrong. And it's tragic, because he should have won the Nobel Prize for finding that the real cause of our ill health is this condition, insulin resistance, which is so prevalent, and it's the high carbohydrate diet that spikes it. And we will have to admit that in due course. Sometime we're going to have to admit it, because it's going to become so obvious. You can't hide the truth forever. And when we do that, we will start making our nation healthy. Because we will tell people, you may not eat processed carbohydrates, you may not eat all that carbohydrate if you want to be healthy, if you're insulin resistant. Because you're just going to get diabetes, you're just going to get obese, and you're going to get heart disease and various other things. So it's frustrating to know the solution, and the solution is simple, but to know that people aren't hearing it and adopting it. Finally, you know, a lot of people ask me about sport and where does the diet fit in sport. And what I believe is the following, that if you are the best Kenyan runner in the world and you want to run a 2-hour marathon, you better be profoundly insulin sensitive so that you can metabolize carbohydrate at very high rates, and you then need to eat a high carbohydrate diet. So that is a tiny proportion of the population, tiny, tiny, tiny. People running a marathon in 2 hours or round about there. I will accept that carbohydrates will make them perform their best. But that is not all of sport. And that's where we go wrong. And we say, well, all sports must have high carbohydrate diets. Let me give you 1 or 2 examples. Bruce Fordyce. I apologize now to you publicly that Bruce Fordyce did not win 12 Comrades marathons, because he should have. But I gave him the wrong advice, and he only won 9. Okay. So what did I do wrong? I told him in 1979 that he must eat a high carbohydrate diet, which he did, and he carbohydrate loaded. And we developed a product with him called FRN, Fordyce, Rose and Noakes. It was a goo, the first goo in the world, produced by a company in Johannesburg with carried Bruce's name and my name. And Bruce, if you watch his running, by the time he'd run his 9th Comrades, he was not the same runner he was when he ran his first one. He was slightly heavier, he was about 1 kilogram or 2 heavier, and he was slower. In the rest of his life, and I'm sure he wasn't mind me telling you this, he put on 12 kilograms. For a guy of 52 kilograms, to add an extra 12 was a lot. And he was not a happy chappy, because he had a fatty liver and he had a bit of a gut. What does that mean? Insulin resistance. And what's he eating? A high carbohydrate diet. So eventually he decides to cut the carbs. He loses that 12 kilograms very quickly, and he reduces his Comrades time from 9.5 to 7.5 hours. He reduced his 5K time in Johannesburg from 23 minutes to 18 minutes at the age of 56. At the age of 56, he can now run 5Ks in 18 minutes. Whereas on this healthy diet, he was running 23 minutes. He recently ran the 2 Oceans, and as an experiment, he ate nothing for breakfast, and he had a big fatty meal the night before. He ran the race on water. Afterwards, he came up to me, he said, "Tim, it's tragic." He said, "I believe if I'd run on this diet when I was younger, I would have been even better." Yeah. Yeah. And the key was that I think he would have survived longer. So he's one. More recently, we converted the Aussie cricket team, and may or may not know that, and how that came about is not important. But it happened in between the 2 Ashes series, when they played in England and then they played in Australia. And if you remember, they played in England, they lost, I think, all the games, and they went to Australia and they won all the games. No. And they changed their diet in between. Now, of course, I'm not going to claim it was the diet that caused the change completely. But I can tell you that amongst them, David Warner used to be known as the fat boy. You could look at him now. He's in fantastic shape. Shane Watson said to me, "Tim, I'm just like you. My father has type 2 diabetes. I've always struggled to control my weight. At the start of the season, I would starve myself to be in shape, but by the end of the season, I would have put on all that weight again." And he said, "I was certain that I was just going to be a fat person. That was my choice." He went on the diet, and he lost all the weight, and you look at him now, he looks fantastic. But the best was Mitchell Johnson. And Mitchell Johnson came out publicly 1 week ago, and he was asked, Why are you bowling so well at the moment? He is now considered the most intimidating bowler in the world. That's his title. And he's critical to Australia if they want to win the World Cup. And he said it was the dietary change that made all the difference. So now what the point about this is, that the diets we eat as athletes, it's not just about what we burn during exercise. It's about much more than that. It's can you control your weight effectively? What's the state of body inflammation? And we know that high carbohydrates, high wheat diets are inflammatory. Do you recover more quickly or not? But most importantly, what about your concentration? And that's what the cricketers tell us. They can now go a day, they do not have to eat every 10 minutes or every hour or whatever. They can go the whole day fasting or almost fasting, and their concentration, their minds just go like that. They're just absolutely calm. Just that makes me think that on Saturday, my granddaughter, who's 3 years old, has been raised on this paleo diet, and we gave her a birthday party with no sugar. No sugar at all. Only paleo, high protein, high fat foods. The children loved it, and they were behaved impeccably well. Impeccably well. And that's the feedback we get so often, that children, once you get the sugar out of their systems, they become well behaved. So those are my points. I want to suggest to you that what we call chronic diseases of lifestyle, and which are crippling this nation, and particularly diabetes, is completely, utterly preventable. But it's not going to be prevented until we do something with the food sources and the food supply. And until we start eating real foods and we stop eating processed foods. That is the key. We have to eat real foods, and we have to teach people how to cook. And I hope, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, that you will introduce cooking as a major course at this university. Because any student who leaves here and cannot cook is not going to be as healthy as they might have been. And that's crucially important. And I'll leave you with one final comment. The future of nutrition in South Africa and health determines on whether we choose grains or animals. We have to make that choice. If we choose grains, we will turn South Africa into the grain basket for China. That's what will happen. We will turn all our land, and we will grow wheat, maize, and soy for China, because that's what is happening globally. Go to Mozambique, northern Mozambique, millions of acres are being cut down to grow grains. Go to the Amazon Delta, exactly the same is happening. South Africa has a choice. We can actually provide enough meat and dairy and fish, sorry, not meat and dairy and cows and so on for the population. And if we do that, we will save the land, because grains destroy the land in a way that you're never told. They destroy the topsoil. They take the topsoil out, and it's gone. And I'm sure that there may be agriculturalists here, but once your topsoil's gone, the nation's finished. And many great nations died when their topsoil went. So we have the choice, and our politicians have to make that choice. Are we going to become the grain basket for China and become unhealthy ourselves and have to build more hospitals and train more doctors and put more into medicine and eventually bankrupt it? Or are we going to change the nature of the food that we provide our people? And that's the decision. And when I started 4 years ago, I had no idea that those are the decisions that we have to make. They are profoundly important. And I hope that you understand not only your own health is dependent on what you're eating, but the health of the nation is determined by the choices we make in the future about whether we go a grain-based diet or we go a more meat-based diet. That's the choice. Thank you very much for your attention.